Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Last Best Hope for Conversation. I am one of your hosts, Jesse Jackson. Joining me is my new rival from Canada, Lou.
Good evening.
So stupid.
Good day. Good morning.
Yes.
Hi.
Today is technically the end of our journey. We are going to talk about Sleeping in Light, the final episode of the Babylon 5 series. We are going to next week talk about the Road Home movie that came out just last year.
23.
Okay, so 2 years ago. But today is Sleeping in Light. Originally aired November 25th, 1998. That was the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. And it ends our journey with our characters. And I think they nailed the landing. So, Lou, your thoughts?
Yeah, it was a very touching and fitting tribute to the entirety of the series and the characters. Yeah.
And Karen, your thoughts?
Yeah, I liked it a lot. Before I turned about 45, I never cried at anything. But now, apparently, whenever I watch or read something that's super sentimental, I'm just a fountain. This episode made me tear up several times. So, yeah, it hit home. And now I'm seeing why the last season took the direction it did.
All right. It is very much, and as we have discussed, when JMS thought he wasn't going to get a fifth season, they filmed this episode. And there was discussion from you guys like, hey, how's it going to do it? And one of you, I can't remember which, maybe both of you suggested, well, maybe there's a time jump. And so that's exactly what it was. John wakes up and he's hearing the thoughts and he goes out for some air, and him and Delenn had a cute little message. She goes, I want to see what this air is for you that, is my rival. And we knew this was coming, and he says, send the messages. So, Karen, did you have any expectation about what the story would be?
I tend to have an open mind about things. So I don't know that I was expecting any expectations on my part. I was happy to see it was a time jump, and especially that opening shot where, I mean, they really set the scene with the gray hair and them looking older. I felt like it was appropriate for being set like in the future.
Yeah.
Because it looked like they weren't as old as they are, right? I mean, they didn't age as much as we would in that amount of time.
Yeah.
And the voices he was hearing, I thought were really interesting. He was talking, and also Lorianne, because Lorianne was the one that gave him this 20 years. And I mean, he has to be incredibly grateful for that.
Yeah.
And that little remark that Delenn makes about, he's done it for a few nights now where he gets up and goes outside, and she finally wants to see how special the air is that he has to get up and go out. It was very cute, and I think the actors did a really good job conveying that they didn't want, but they had to face it anyway.
All right.
Yeah, I thought once we did the time jump and they said it was 20 years, I said, oh, so we're going to close off the Lorianne loop. And that's pretty well what this episode was about. The actors didn't really look that much older. They just put like a touch of gray. They all did move a little bit slower. I don't know if that was intentional or just subconsciously as they were portraying older versions of their characters. So I thought that played out nicely. I had to kind of chuckle when he said he wanted to see the sunrise, because if you're in the geek sphere of pop culture, there was just recently a fan-made film for Star Trek called Unification, which showed Captain Kirk going through a bit of his own being resurrected and his own personal journey, taking him to the planet where the original Spock is passing away, and their final moments are them both looking at the sunrise. So I thought it harkened me back to that fan-made film. And if you haven't seen that, you should check it out. Look for it on YouTube. It's quite good. So this has that same flavor, just stretched out over an hour episode. And I like that, and we'll get into that later on, I guess. But yeah, it was a good opening, and I pretty well knew where the episode was going once they mentioned the 20-year time jump.
I can't remember if I knew that immediately or not.
I mean, the one thing that we have that's different from the people watching it when it first appeared is that we've analyzed all this to death. So it's easier to remember the 20-year thing, I think, is, what we have in our pocket.
So we kind of catch up on our cast. Susan is now a general.
She spent some time away.
Yes.
She may not have had the time to rise to that rank.
Well, in other words, general and admiral are comparable, but one in the Navy, one in the Army.
I see.
So I did like seeing the publicist is someone who is a pretty well-known actress.
Romy Rosemont. She's married to Stephen Root, and she was in an episode of Friends with Stephen where they played a married couple that had something to do with time.
Yeah. I always like her. She's been in a ton of things, including A Million Little Things.
She played the mother of the student who died, real life. I can't remember his name, but she played his mother, and she had a lot of airtime.
I always like her.
Meet Stephen Root. So they're cool together.
Claudia's kind of bored. She feels like an old warhorse, she talks about. And a ranger shows up. They have a little tuffle, and Susan's like, I've told you, anytime a ranger comes, they come to my room right away. So thought about where Susan has ended up. Karen.
Yeah, I can see where Susan would hate that more than anything. And also kind of being coddled, being shielded from everything. And that guy, he looked like a subordinate, but he was acting like her keeper. And I really hated that guy. I thought, well, how dare you question her and to say, no, you shouldn't have, and it's against protocol. Yeah, that's up to Susan to decide. So that little scene I loved her repartee with Romy, with the publicist. That, it's like she understood that Susan hated doing this, but she had to do it. And I liked that. And then the guy comes in and is just an ass to her. And I did like seeing that, like, every person knew that when this ranger comes, it was serious business. Like they've all been preparing their staff for if a ranger ever comes, you have to let them in. And this was no exception. I thought it was a great scene.
Yeah, I do think sometimes the staff become a little too important to them in their own mind.
Right.
And, I think it starts out they're trying to do good things by protecting, you manage up. But yeah, I agree. It was kind of, hey, wait a minute. Lou, how about you? Any thoughts?
It was probably the saddest scene in the episode for me, because we're seeing that Susan really hasn't moved on from what happened with her and Marcus. She's just sort of going through the motions in her life at this point. And she's very closed and very reserved. And I think she's very lonely, and I just found it very sad.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's well said. We get the scene at the end where they show Marcus and then they show his cryo tank, right? And if you freeze it, it says cryogenic suspension chamber, subject Marcus Cole, designated ranger, status deceased, comments, indefinite hold in the event of new resurrection technology requested by Commander S. Ivanova. So, she's never given up hope that maybe
Sure.
he could come back.
It's hard to
Yeah.
move on from that, like someone in a coma.
Well,
Um,
and I also think,
That
yep.
you should
yeah,
told me that, Jesse. Even if they could resurrect him, he'd be 20 years younger than her.
Yep.
yeah,
So it's yeah.
I don't think either of them would care though.
yeah. And I also think that makes me think of the 1963, right?
Sorry, I don't have the reference.
He finds
1963? What's that?
the Stephen King book.
11/22/6.
Okay,
He
sorry, I
Yeah.
was like
visits.
No,
1963.
I got the title wrong.
He
Yeah,
visits the woman.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Sad. That
Wow, I
was.
should have got that.
yeah, yeah. I think that, and I'm sure in her mind, right? She's had two great loves, the Talia, which turns out to be a sleeper agent, and now him dying. She's like, I'm doomed in love, right?
Right.
hmm
Right.
Yeah. He then we go and we see that arguably, I think Michael is the happiest. He is running Edgar's Industries. He's still enjoying a good cigar.
Got a
He has a
daughter.
beautiful, yeah,
Yep.
beautiful daughter. Him and Elise are still happily married. And I felt, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, and we'll start with you, Lou. I felt it was a little because we had not seen the fifth season when they filmed this, him going, when Franklin, who they have stayed friends, says, "Do I book one or two?" And Michael talking about, well, John and I've had our problems. I felt that felt kind of a little awkward considering everything that five had done, right? Like you figure. So, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was also kind of struck by why didn't Franklin get his own ranger and his own invitation? I thought that was kind
Mhm.
of weird, but
Just a minute.
sure. Okay.
Tried to give it there.
Okay. Yeah,
And that, I mean, but I think
right.
that would be okay.
So, the episode surprisingly fits very well within the framework of the fifth season, considering it was filmed in the prior season. But there are a
Yes.
few moments where it doesn't quite meld together quite perfectly, and this is one of those moments that you pointed out with
Yeah.
Garibaldi. I did like that. Um, Arguably, Garibaldi had the most troubled arc during the series, so
Yeah.
it's very gratifying to see that he's come out the other side in probably the best shape of any of the big five or six cast
Yeah.
members. But they don't address his mind block with Vester at all. So does he still
No.
have it, or because they were going to Lita was going to visit him after 2 years if he was holding up his end of the bargain. And so that wasn't
Yeah.
addressed at all. And Lita wasn't addressed at all again.
Were Go ahead.
There were fan rumblings about that.
Yes,
Yeah.
that people who are fans of her said she wasn't mentioned, and JMS's answer was that who would have? Like if Zach was there, he may have mentioned her.
Yeah. And why wasn't Zach invited?
The letter
He does.
came back. Sheridan says to Zach.
Sheridan says, "Oh, that explains why the letter came back."
Thanks.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay.
I really loved that story. I loved seeing that he and Franklin are bonded still. I'm
Mhm.
guessing that's through all the adversities that they share.
Yeah.
I did think it was weird that neither of them had really stayed in touch. Although, if you think about it, 20 years, do you still talk a lot to people that you knew 20 years ago? I mean, there's a couple people in my life that I touch base with, but 20 years ago is like, you don't really keep
Yeah.
friends unless they're really, really, really close friends. And, he's got all these things to do. And I mean, it's understandable, but it's kind of sad in my mind that they didn't
Yeah.
keep in touch.
That when you've mentioned that, Kara, that for me, it's a bit different circumstances because I moved, so obviously a lot of connections were severed But it also reminds me of the near the ending of the book and the movie, The Body or Stand By Me, is, when Richard Dreyfuss is talking about how the friendships of those four characters diverged over the years. Like the two of them, he barely kept in contact with pretty quickly, and the one character played by River Phoenix, they gutted it out through school together and that. But then he hadn't talked to him in over 10 years, and then he read that newspaper article about him being killed in the restaurant. So
Yeah.
that's life, and that's what happens with friendships and acquaintances. Your life paths take you on different routes.
They moved as far
Yeah.
apart as you can get.
I get the feeling that they still kind of stayed in touch, but we were just talking about this yesterday. Sam is, for a lot of years, was my best friend. We worked together at Real Page. He and I went to lunch every day together. I mean, it was an exception if he and I did not go to lunch. And for the longest time, we would at 5 o'clock play cribbage for about an hour at the end of the day.
Oh, wow.
And so when I was released from Real Page, he and I still went to lunch every week when I was unemployed, and then when I got another job. And then when I got a job we were like 45 minutes away, then we started doing it every couple of months. And now we hardly ever see each other, but I still would think of them as my best friends. Chris was talking about him and Colin, who they met right before their freshman year of high school. They text 2 to 3 times a day, and if they don't talk every day, they talk. I do have friends that when I worked with the previous jobs, for the longest time, we did meet for lunch on a fairly regular basis. So yeah, I think you move away. I like to think in my mind that they still saw each other, just not as much
Mhm.
because they're all busy.
A couple times a year, maybe.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And it does sound like Franklin and Michael stayed close because he talked about your goddaughter.
They're a lot
Absolutely.
closer to Mars than
Yeah,
Earth, right?
yeah,
And probably he goes to Mars every once in a while to
exactly.
exobiology.
Yeah.
I have a friend, my best friend in high school, Cheryl. She and I have kind of a weird thing where if something really big happens in our lives, for
Hmm.
some reason, we know and we contact the other. I hadn't talked to her in several years because of a issue we had when her mother died. I had just thought of her like, I don't know, 6 hours or so before she called
Yeah.
me. It's just weird how we have that bond, but we don't talk every day. We couple
Hmm.
times a year maybe.
Yeah. All right. Then we get Vir seems to be really enjoying being emperor.
I argue that he is more happy than Garibaldi.
Okay. Okay.
Garibaldi did say that, the way he was, what did he call it? There's no passion in it or something. He's happy, but it's
Hmm.
not exciting anymore.
Stock is that, stock is it's not sexy, right?
Right, exactly. And I
Yeah.
don't think Veer has many complaints about what's
Yeah.
going on in his life. That
Hmm.
seemed like he really got into his role as emperor, paid off for him.
Yeah. Hmm.
I had
Yeah.
no idea that Vir was emperor.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
really?
He was never addressed by that title in the episode. I realize now that he's wearing the uniform of the emperor, but
Yes.
I just thought that was just a diplomatic attire. In the timeline of the show, we haven't seen this final moments of Londo, and now it makes sense why they were saying Jakar's name as well, because they died together. But that just totally flew by me in this episode. I still thought Londo was the emperor, and I thought
Mm.
Jakar was still out with Lita doing whatever explorations they were doing. So I'm feeling pretty embarrassed right now because my interpretation of those Ver
Hmm.
moments are totally different or changed quite a bit. As Londo proclaimed that he would probably be the last emperor of New Centauri as well. So
Hmm.
that, in my mind, negated Vir becoming the emperor. So that's totally
Yeah.
skated by. They should have addressed him by his title at least at one point in the episode, just to drive the point home. But I guess they thought it would be obvious by his attire.
I don't remember what did they call him when they walked in and he was in the bed with the women. I'd have to
I
think.
don't remember.
If they
Yeah.
don't call him emperor, it was sire or sir. You also see later, right, that I thought the story about the Paklama
Hmm.
was really beautiful.
Yeah.
And yeah, I agree with you, Susan. He is very happy. He
Don't call me
seems very
Shirley.
happy
Yeah.
about, he's trying to do the best for his people, but also really it's good to be king.
Yeah.
He seems to be enjoying all the thoughts he can do. So we move on to, I think that's it. That's all our players, right? And they
Yeah.
all show up for a dinner.
Yeah.
And I wonder what did she have to get because John asks, did we get everything we needed? And she said, yeah, it took some time. So maybe one of the things was alcohol, because usually you don't keep alcohol on
Minbar. Yeah.
a bar, so everything, but maybe some of their favorite foods and everything.
Hmm.
And they appear to have a really lovely dinner party. So, Karen, I'll stick with you. Any thoughts on, laughing the stories?
Yeah, to me, it reminded me of when you have a party for someone who just died
Yeah,
and you tell anecdotes about them, when they all kind of got on the subject of their friends that had passed
yeah,
away. And Veer kind of sparked that with his anecdote about Londo, and they all toasted to
yeah,
their friends. I really liked that Franklin was going to say Marcus, and Susan interrupted him and said Marcus.
yeah,
And it's almost like Franklin didn't want to he didn't want Susan to have to mention him. I thought that was a really nice touch that Susan toasted to him, and
yeah,
hearing, that they toast Londo and Jakar. I thought that was great too, because they had a huge impact on them, and just it was, and hearing that Lanier had passed apparently was a surprise. So, and I'm assuming that's what it meant, that Lanier had died. Is that
So I don't know. I don't know if he is officially dead or just out of their life. I would think you could make the argument, right, that he somehow died and word got to her. It is, though, a little, she mentions him, and, I wonder if there's a little bit of, him still, oh, yeah, that person who tried to kill me. Yeah.
although I don't think he held it against him.
Hmm. Yeah. What, Lou?
Yeah, this is the Lanier reference is the part of this episode doesn't jibe with what's gone on in season 5, because obviously when they wrote this episode, they didn't know the arc of Lanier's story. Reference by Delenn for Lanier to me is different than the one that we're drawing from.
Okay.
And I don't know what the original intent of that, whether it was that Lanier had died as a ranger, I think makes the most sense. But in the context of the arc of the series, with what he did just in the prior episode, again, it's pretty sad that he could still be alive, but
Hmm.
he's gone. To seek his own path because of what he did when he didn't try to rescue John right off the get-go. So it's one part of the episode, and it's probably the biggest sticking point for me because that linear arc is not resolved to my satisfaction in this. So I think Lanier has passed away for what reasons we don't know or how. The rest of the stories were pretty good, especially the story about Londo. And again, I'm kicking myself for not realizing that Fear's the Emperor because you know what, when Londo passed away. Well, of course he passed away because Jakar and
Yeah.
Jakar's dead too because they killed each other. And I'm just like
Right.
going, duh.
It was bothering me, so I looked it up, and they call him Majesty.
Oh, okay.
Majesty, we've just received a courier from Minbar.
I totally, man,
Yeah.
that's not good. So I guess I wasn't paying full attention to those scenes when I should have been.
You're good.
Yeah, so it was pretty good. I think the Garibaldi story was a little overplayed, a little they or forced. It felt a bit forced to me. The Garibaldi was, I thought that he was overacting a little bit there, and I think Sheridan too. His response, they were both trying to push hard on a story that I guess because we never
Mhm.
saw it, it's kind of hard to relate to how funny it seemed at the time. But that just felt actory for me, I guess is the best way to put it, and not it didn't feel
Mhm.
real, I guess is the best way to put it. It felt kind of forced. So, but
Yeah.
overall, I thought the scene was pretty touching, and of course, it
Mhm.
leads to that great scene between Delenn and Susan after the dinner.
In my mind, because of reading the over the years Lurker's Guide, where he had talked about when Bill Mummy said, "Hey, I think Lanier's in love with Delenn," and he says, "Are you sure you want to go there?" So I think JMS, when he wrote Sleeping in Light, did know this was going to happen. Like
Mm.
he knew somehow, he may not know the specifics, but he knew Lanier was going to betray the Alashok and betray Sheridan somehow. So, at least in my mind, when I connect the dots, and I am having to connect dots, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, Susan and I think Delenn have a great conversation, and it's kind of implied, right? And they talk about it. Come lead the Rangers. You're bored at what you're doing. We need this. Delenn is needs a someone to help her run the alliance. And I also have questions about the alliance. Is it kind of like an empire? Like you don't vote for someone? You just, like how do you do
Yeah,
this?
yeah.
But yeah. So while I got you, Luke, go ahead. Thoughts on Susan and Delenn's thoughts and where Susan ends up being.
Yeah, I thought that was really
Hmm.
deftly handled. The symmetry on two counts, one, Susan becoming the leader of the Rangers, and that way she can honor Marcus's memory. And then you also have the symmetry of both Susan and Delenn have suffered the loss of their loved ones. And it's more poignant for Susan, obviously, because she never was able to have those moments over the last 20 years that Delenn had. But still,
Yeah.
they can offer each other support and they will understand each other better because of their shared
Hmm.
loss. So I thought that was a really nice touch.
Hmm. Karen?
Yeah, I think that it's a fantastic scene between the two of them.
Yeah.
But
And
each person has kind of a symbiotic relationship with someone else. Even Vir, I think that was kind of the memory of Londo. So, we see Garibaldi and Franklin, and now we see Delenn and Susan. They hadn't seen each other all the time, like Garibaldi and Franklin, but there's still that shared experience of their love and respect for John. And the fact that Delenn is going to have her nearby now and someone to talk with and reminisce about and
Mhm.
cry on their shoulder, I think is really fantastic. And it also kind of helps Susan in a way because now she's going to lead the Rangers, and to have the close tie with something that Marcus felt so strongly about is also, I think it's going to be good for her.
Mhm. John talks about going on Sunday drives with his father, and he decides that that's what he wants to do. He doesn't want to die in his bed. Um, Franklin has told him he thinks it's less than a week to live. So it isn't like, you could make the argument John's being a little selfish, having Delenn not get another 2, 3, 4, maybe even 7 days with him. But he wants to go in his own way. And we get the very formal goodbye where she dresses very formal and says, "I'm heard you dress up on Sundays."
Yeah.
And we see them saying goodbye. I did not think this was a big deal, but when John is looking in the mirror, there is a cross behind him. And yeah, and that was not deliberate, but when JMS, who was directing, this is the only episode he's ever directed, and Warner Brothers had suggested because it's his vision that he should try that. He's like, when he saw that, don't change, don't change. I don't think it's as a big deal as he does, but it is if you see that scene. So, and we get a goodbye, and John is off in his little personal, White Star ship. So, Lou, what do you think about the goodbye?
Yeah, I thought it was beautifully done. I liked him dressing up in his old uniform, even though it fit him perfectly.
Yeah.
So, they're trying to acknowledge the aging process because generally you can't
Yeah.
wear something that you used to wear 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So that was nice. And I thought the whole concept of the Sunday drive was perfect. I remember growing up that was often something that we did, or my dad did with us, and our family. We'd go for Sunday drives in the afternoon quite often. So that aspect of it, I thought was quite touching, and I assume that that's something that GMS probably grew up with as well, or I don't know if how common that is an activity for families nowadays, but when we were growing up, I think that was not unusual. That makes me feel a little sad that that's something that doesn't probably happen as much anymore nowadays. So, and then, was Franklin being selfish? Um, I
John, you mean?
John, yeah, sorry. I thought I don't think he was. I think maybe that was almost an instinctual thing for him. That's kind of at the core of his being. Like, he started out in the corps as a pilot and whatnot. So I just think that's in his blood, and
Yeah.
he just wanted to. He's kind of melding a couple of different things from his life experiences, the Sunday drive, being back in space again,
Mm-hmm.
and whether and I'm reading into this final scene or not, and because I don't know how the animated movie kicks off, but I kind of am projecting that when he disappears in that flash of light, that's sort of the moment when the animated movie starts, so that his journey, because Lorian tells
Yeah.
him, that you're starting a new journey, and I kind of wonder if the animated movie is the first voyage of his new journey kind of thing.
Tell you?
Sure.
Yeah. The animated movie takes place right before they arrive in Minbar to set up the
Alliance?
alliance.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And then you do time jumps through alternate universes.
Okay.
So yeah, so just to set the
Oh,
expectation,
that's too bad.
it is this he does not continue the story whatsoever.
Oh,
This
okay.
is though there is some nice twists in that.
Okay.
So okay, just so you'll go in there going, oh okay, this isn't what happened to John
Right.
afterwards.
Right.
Yeah, all right. Karen, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much what Lou said. Although I am a little sad to hear that it's not a continuation of Babylon 5, the movie that we're going to talk about next week. I would have liked to see them in the future.
Yeah. Sorry, didn't mean
No,
to
that's
pop the
all right.
bubble, but I
That's
was
all
really worried because I was like, because I knew that in all the previews they explained what it was. So I was worried you guys would go,
right.
yeah,
I'm glad you said something.
yeah.
Yeah.
So he makes it to Babylon 5. And once again, we get a joke about turning the lights off. And a certain cameo is the
That's right.
person who turns off the lights.
First for him
Yes,
to be in the
that
show.
is the only time. And he realized that if he was going to do a cameo, that's what he'd want to do. He would want to be the one literally turning off the lights on the franchise.
Hmm.
So let's talk about him seeing Zach, talking about it. They're going to decommission the station and blow it up. So any thoughts on that, Karen?
The Babylon 5 project was a big deal, and I hate to see that there isn't a centralized place anymore for that kind of thing to happen.
Yes.
But I mean, I understand that seeing the empty halls and how kind of well used, I'll say, it hurt a little bit to see that that was going to happen, but I understand why it had to.
Yeah.
Destroying Babylon 5 made sense because he has to expand, and now he can't rely on that centralized thing anymore to write stories about it. And it also broadens their universe, the Babylon 5 universe.
Yeah. Lou?
Yeah, I'm a little mixed on the final scenes with the station. I didn't really buy the rationale that it would become a hazard to space travel. I mean, it's by a planet. Like, what?
Yeah.
How could it be a hazard? Is it going to drift if they shut the reactors off? And even if it does, how far would it drift? And why would you blow it up? Why would you tear it down and reuse the materials for something else? Because it's expensive to move stuff around in space. Symbolically, I understood the blowing up of the station. Logically, it didn't really make much sense to me. Wouldn't you want some sort of meeting place for them to like neutral ground? Well, I don't know if there's a planet that they have designated like that, but it seems to me that space is a big place. And if you have a central meeting point that's sort of equidistant from all the members, that would be ideal. And to have one planet become the focal point of the alliance would symbolically be a bit of an issue, I think, to some races.
Yeah.
If it was Minbar, that automatically makes that planet more important than the other ones. So I'm kind of mixed on that from a logical stance, but from a, symbolic. So
Yeah.
I just find it wasteful to blow it up, though, and not use it for scrap.
So, yeah, I will send you guys, because I know you guys don't usually read Lurker's Guide. He got a fair amount of feedback from people similar to you. Like, why would you do this? And his justification was, and I do read a little bit of justification, like after the fact, like him doubling down on his decision. And I almost wish he would have just said, look, I thought it was a perfect way to end this. He's always said he did not want to do a franchise, that even though he has come back a couple of times to the universe, he did not want to create a Star Trek universe. He wanted just to tell this 5-year story with a couple of maybe offshoots. But the idea was Babylon 5 was built the cheapest of all the stations, that there were weapon systems on there they needed to take care of, that it would have been even more dangerous to try to bring it to the planet's atmosphere to try to burn up. They all read to me as a little just justification of the fact of I wanted the dramatic look of, with the great music, which I did think the scene with the music and seeing it blow up was incredibly strong.
And watching everyone kind of turn their ships away.
Yeah.
I get it.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah, everyone remembered.
Yeah. My thought, and again, it's headcanon. They didn't want any of that to fall into hands that it didn't belong in.
Yeah.
So they blew it up. But, that's just old tech.
Yeah. So we go back that he meets Lauren. Lauren says, of course, I'm waiting for you. And John just disappears. I know that JMS was a little unhappy that Deep Space Nine had the same sort of ending, that their guy just disappeared. And there was always that trouble he had pitched Babylon Space to Paramount people, and then Deep Space Nine came in afterwards. We talked about this very early in our journey. He did kind of feel like this was a similar ending. And so I thought the best part of it was the idea that Delenn waking up every morning to see the sun, and her in her mind, John's next to her. That was
Yeah.
very poignant to me, very sweet. And then when you go back to the fourth season, where an older Delenn comes and tells them when they're trying to rewrite his history, I think that's very powerful. I also think of the scene on the fourth season where they bring back all the holograms of all the characters, and the
Right.
Garibaldi hologram screws everything up and says,
Yep.
"Rest carefully, my thing." So those mean a lot.
Those
So
were in
Lou,
character.
yeah, Lou, it's over.
Well, I've already spoken about what I had
Yeah,
hoped would happen.
yeah,
Given how that was set up previously in the other seasons, that it totally made sense for me. Overall, it's been an incredible journey with the two of you, and to all our listeners and especially to those that have taken the time to comment and send us their thoughts. It's been a rewarding experience, and I'm glad that the two of you agreed to do this so that I could justify my purchase of the box set. Uh, but I can see how this has more of a niche following than other
hmm
niche shows. I think the initial concept of four seasons and then finding out they had a fifth hurt the show
yeah,
because the fourth season felt very rushed. And there was a lot of moments where great character interactions could have taken place that didn't have the time to do because they
hmm
didn't think they were
yeah,
going to get a fifth season. I do think that hurts the series overall. I can appreciate its overall place in the fandom pantheon of shows in that it was the first show to really have a continuing storyline over the arc of its series, uneven as it might have been in the last two because of the unknown continuation of the series. Some of the acting was great. Generally, most of the original cast, the main stars were good. I still think that some of them, like Lita and that, weren't always up to snuff. I didn't like the way they ended Lanier's storyline. I can feel for Bill Mummy. That's really got to suck to go through 5 years and then on the second last episode, basically just blow that character out of the water. I think that was a bad decision. I'm sure JMS would argue but it's realistic. But when you're watching a show with a group of characters that you've come to know, you don't always want realistic. You want comfort
yeah,
food. I'm glad to have watched the show. I At this moment in time, I don't think it has the rewatchability factor of other shows that would make me want to come back and watch it again. So I would place it in the lower half of my tier of genre shows that I've come to like. Like I still think Fringe is a superior show to this. I also have to temper my viewpoint with not being in the moment when the show came along in the first place, because that in a way is what this episode sort of encapsulates. If you've had that long-term relationship with somebody over 20 years or something like that, when it comes to an end and it's something new and exciting that really hadn't been done before, then I can understand why the fans are as fervent about the show as they are. But unfortunately, I've come into this show at a different point in my timeline and watched it over a compressed period of time. But I'm definitely glad that we did the journey. It's been a big hole in my fandom uh, circumviti, you could say,
yeah,
and I'm glad it's that hole has now been filled. And if, if there's any advice, I think that he should have developed a writer's room with a core group of writers and spread the workload around a little bit more, because unfortunately, I do think that his while the show definitely demonstrated his strengths, it also, on the flip side, demonstrated his weaknesses. And I think that has to do with the character beats and the personal relationships to a certain degree. So
okay.
that's my long-winded answer.
Karen?
No, I'm kidding.
Ditto.
And
I
the
do
listeners
agree.
breathe a sigh of relief.
What?
Yeah. No, you don't have to repeat everything that I just said.
Yeah.
No, I'll give a slightly different
Hmm.
opinion and take on it. Um, I do say I feel like I'm counted among the fans of this series because overall I thought it really did a lot. I can look back on that time period and think, wow, there was a lot of stuff they did that was new and exciting and kind of helped to expand the genre into different things. It was character driven, like some other shows. Some other genre shows aren't character driven, they're technology driven
Or premise driven. There's a gig.
exactly.
There is a MacGuffin.
Exactly. I mean, a lot of people would say like Voyager, where everything is hung on the fact that they're trying to get back to Earth.
Yeah.
I kind of don't agree with that. I loved Voyager, but I know
Mhm.
that's an opinion. It suffered because there wasn't different writing styles coming in to come together and make a cohesive story like a writer's room. I felt like having all of that burden on his shoulders, you could see fatigue every once in a while in it that, I just want to get this episode out there and explain
Yeah.
something. And I'm not saying he's lazy by any means. I understand that there are times that when you're carrying a burden,
Yeah.
whether you want it or not, there are times that you resent having to carry that burden.
Yeah.
I feel like we see a little bit of that every now and then. I will say, I really enjoyed watching this show with you guys. I liked it a lot more than I thought I would. One of the things that really impressed me was the guest casting was really stellar. There were so many people that took a tiny role and made it stand out in this series without getting in the way of the regular cast. One of them, I'll say, appeared in this episode. The man who played Lorian, he played other roles, one of them being the
Yeah.
Jack the Ripper character. And I thought he was incredible whenever he appeared in the show. And then we have Jakar and
Londo.
Londo, thank you. Jakar and Londo, who were a standout, I think, throughout from the first to the last episodes. I am incredibly sad that I didn't get to see this, but overall, I am so incredibly glad that we watched this and we decided to talk about this. I'm sure Lou's going to bring it up because it's a comment on the YouTube page that, some people tend to argue that they're, it's hard to, when you're a fan, to allow other people to kind of nitpick things.
Yeah.
I'll give Star Wars as an example of that.
Yeah.
The fans nitpick everything. And I feel like this show it has a very a loyal enough fan base that they don't like when someone brings up those things. But I think part of why we did this podcast is to shine a light on the good things as well as some of the bad.
Yeah.
And so I really appreciate those people that kind of gave us the grace to, and I do say this in a comment back in a reply. I appreciate those that gave us the grace to be critical of the show. And I
Yeah.
hope they understand that that doesn't mean we don't love it.
Yeah.
I think this had a place, and I do think it was significant in genre TV. So that's
Yeah.
my long-winded.
All right. So I'm going to wrap up my thoughts in a minute and then we'll do ratings and do feedback. But I thought really quickly, I always write down before we go into a season. And so
The
our
things that
season
we
5 questions or thoughts was, well, are we going to see the Psi Corps again? Will Bester come back? And that was a yes.
Mhm.
Tell a fast story. Is that, all season? No, we got done.
Thank
Thank
God.
Uh,
you.
you guys asked if there would be more one-off episodes. I don't think there was, really.
No,
No?
not really.
No.
No.
How will the series end since the last episode was already filmed? So you guys ended up catching that up. Will Susan show up? only because she was filmed in the previous
season. Yeah.
Yeah. Was there a new couple for the season? And there really wasn't a romantic new subplot.
No,
Was it
I
kind of
mean, you can
Franklin and
tell,
number one?
Maybe.
right? There's
Kind of.
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we did ask, is Garibaldi officially married?
And yeah,
Was there a Marcus replacement?
Yes.
kind
Kind
don't want to even classify Byron as a
Yeah.
replacement for him, but
Where is John going? We don't know, right?
yeah.
That he sacrificed himself.
I gotta say, I'm so
Yeah.
disappointed we didn't get to see the events leading up to that
Right.
confrontation.
Yeah. Did we get a storyline of Bester's girlfriend?
Nope.
of.
Was there an Earth storyline? No.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean, we saw someone, but
Yeah.
yeah, she wasn't even
Yeah.
in this episode.
Yeah. And we ended up getting the kind of greatest hits.
The
Yeah.
clip show
Yes.
part of this
Yeah.
series.
I think the most disappointing for me was that no final resolution with Bester.
Yeah.
True.
Because his last episode was good as that story.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah.
So, and I put in there, and I think you may enjoy in the chat, JMS did a fake letter to Tolkien
Oh,
about why that Lord of the Rings failed. And it talks about, he says,
over.
no. It was his point was you pick a story and you tell a story. And there will always be side characters that you don't fully explore. And if that is a character you love about it, you're frustrated, but that doesn't necessarily mean the story is a bad one. What happened to Tom Bombardi? He was an important part of the story. Then you left this thread unresolved. If you read the Lurker's Guide, almost every question you have, he either gives an answer or he says, we're covering that in the books.
Okay.
Right? So, like Bester and Garibaldi, you can imply that because he's there and healthy, that it got resolved. We just don't know why, how.
Right. Or
They cover that in the book. What happened with Londo and the urn? That's covered in the book.
I would have liked to see David.
Yeah,
That would have
exactly.
been nice.
And kind of the idea, right, that John not seeing his child one last time was a little
Frustrating.
Yeah, I think that would have been, and did he swing by where he was training and just stop and say hi to him and like, oh, I just happened to be in the neighborhood or something? No, they didn't. Yeah. I will tell you, when the doctor in July said that we thought my mom was not going to do well. Linda was in the hospital. She was incredibly nauseous and just not doing well. And the doctor said she has colitis. Her best friend Susan came and stayed with her. I slept a couple hours, got in the car, drove to Louisiana, spent an hour at my mom's bedside, and came home.
Right.
In 15 hours, I drove to Louisiana and back because I had to see my mom one last time before she passed.
Sure.
So I have a little bit of problem with that.
Same. I agree.
So when I was at a comic, and I'm sure I've told the story before, but it's a good way to wrap it up. I was at a small comic convention in Dallas, and Mura Ferlin was there, and Peter David was there. And I attended the Babylon 5 panel, had never watched anything of Babylon 5. And she said, well, now we know what happens. And now we just got to see. So this was after they had filmed Sleeping in Light, and 5 was going to come out. And she talked about she was not impressed with the storyline about her having a period. And she says, I hated to mention that with the writer in the room.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, I'm going to check this series out when it was on TNT. And we were implementing SAP at my company at the time, and it was going horribly. I mean, nothing was right. We went implementing this new software, and we went from having a 5-minute talk time to a 25-minute talk time in a call center. And that just means it was horrible. It took us from taking 5 steps to close a call to like 30 steps. It was just horrible. And I got home and I was on the VHS tape, backed up and watched the new episode for me because TNT was stripping it Monday through Friday. I would watch the latest episode on TNT and just lose myself into this series. So I can attach that series to it providing me solace in a crazy world. So when I watch it, it brings back those memories. So I have that emotional attachment to it because of that. I remember used to saying that I want to see Hill Street Blues set in a Star Trek universe. I always thought that would be cool to have something like Hill Street Blues where there's multiple storylines. You kind of have an overarching arc. There's continuation, that chaos, but set in a universe. And Babylon 5 felt like that for me. So yeah, I have that emotional attachment to it. In fact, one of the local TV channels or some TV channel was, streaming it 1 episode a day, and I taped them all and rewatched it toward the end. So yeah, this was really fun for me to rewatch. And so I'm really glad we got to go through this journey together.
How similar, because we're building a CRM database, which is also a SAP kind of thing right now. And I'm
all right. Yeah, Lou, any final thoughts?
I'm just wondering, like you said, you enjoyed watching the series again. Did anything change for you at all overall, or did anything that what we discussed over the last what's it been 2.5 years struck you in a different way this time? Or
I was able to see more of the flaws this year, with you guys. I truly despised the telepath. And I actually, on the positive side, I liked season 5 more than I remember liking it.
Cool.
I remember kind of almost watching 4 and then going almost directly to Sleeping in Light. Like, I don't even need to see any 5 at all, right?
Right.
So by watching this again, I did felt like, no, there were some good episodes and a couple of great episodes. Sad to say that since we've talked about Day of the Dead, which was one of my favorite episodes, there now has the Neil Gaiman connotation that, as we discussed last week before we hit record, there is a taint to that episode now that is kind of a little sad. But
a lot sad.
So that is, but overall, I've enjoyed watching this with you through y'all's eyes a great deal.
That's great.
All right. So let's start with, I would give this episode a 10 because of the emotional payoff. And I think in my mind, if I had to do individual seasons, I would go. But overall, I would put this 9.5, maybe. And it would definitely be in my top 10 favorite series of all times. And it might make top 5. So if I was going to rank the series as a whole, I would give it probably a 9 because I certainly see the flaws, but something that important. Karen, how about you? Episode in the season series.
This episode, I think I would give a 9 as well. I really liked it. There weren't many things to pick at, and that's a big deal to me.
Right.
So I'm going to give it a 9.
Okay.
All right. And the 0.75 friends we lost along the way.
How about you, Lou?
Yeah, I would give this episode 9.5 sentimental shine-ons. It is a good closing for the series, despite some of my quibbles. For the series overall, that's tough for me right now because, like I said, I have no compunction to want to rewatch it right now. Maybe down the road, but I kind of doubt it. So I recognize its importance in the field, but I think I would give it like an 8 out of 10 because the last season and a half was uneven because of the scheduling issues. And I just think there were times when they dismissed some really great opportunities for character interaction. So,
Yeah.
yeah. And would it make my top 10? I guess it might fit near the bottom. If it got in at all, it might squeak into the top 10. But I'm trying to go through shows that I've never really made a list like that. So obviously some are automatics for me because like the original Star Trek,
Hmm.
Twilight Zone, Fringe, Farscape,
Lost.
Lost.
Is Lost in your top 10?
Yeah, Lost would probably be in my top 10. Night Stalker, even though it's not a great
Mm.
series, that's
Yeah.
kind of like a parallel to me with Babylon 5. Night Stalker, the movies were fantastic, especially the
Yeah.
first one. The series was pretty uneven, but I just think Darren McGavin, inhabited that
Hmm.
character so perfectly with that Panama hat and the white suit and
Mm.
that old camera. I just get a smile every time I think about him, even though most of the episodes weren't that great.
Okay.
But I think a lot of people who like Babylon 5 that carry that sentimental glow with it as well.
Sure.
So,
Sure.
yeah, I'm glad I
Uh,
watched it.
It would be in
we,
my top 10 genre shows, I think. But I have a lot of other things, like
yeah.
Parks and Rec is way up there on my list of favorite shows.
Yeah.
And I know you haven't watched it, but man, it is good and smart and funny.
Hmm.
I'd put all of those Michael Shore shows in that. The Good Place, Parks and Rec, about Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and The Office. Those are
Yeah.
really
Yeah,
way
like
up
the
there
first seasons of Veronica Mars were fantastic.
Yeah. I think that
Breaking
might be,
Bad.
we should make a topic of that.
on genre show.
Genres, maybe do comedies.
Okay, boss.
Uh, Yeah, that sounds
Yep.
good.
Salute.
Mr.
Yes.
Manager.
Karen, did
So
we get
what the rating on Lurker's Guide?
good point. Look it up real quick. There isn't. Sleeping in Light on Lurker's Guide got a 9.34.
Oh.
Okay.
And if you want to be amused, there is a picture of a duck on Sleeping in Light. And there is a question, why is there a duck on the image? And there is this long thing where JMS talked about how this is a duck, and it's something about Sinclair's penis became a duck and did all this other stuff. It's a very funny long story. So,
Okay.
yeah, it's worth reading. And I do think that if you ever rewatch this, Lurker's Guide is a really fun way to reread this afterwards to kind of see some other insight. All
I
right.
think there are episodes I'd rewatch again for sure.
One of the things that the BBC is doing is on a selective basis is they're taking classic Doctor Who episodes that were like 6 or 8 25-minute episodes and making it into an hour and a half, 2 hour
Mm,
episode.
that's
And
cool.
we've done that a couple of times where Charles and I, because of the pacing changing, is pretty slick. So yeah, it
Yeah.
would be cool.
Fan favorite episodes.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
yeah, like I think you could make a three, like you could do a 60, 70 episode versus the 100.
And there are story arcs that you could compress into
Yeah,
like a long
yeah.
movie. Yeah.
Yeah, and you'll see that he has two different thoughts. After you watch the anime movie, we'll talk about possible futures. And then he has said that if they ever got it, he would reboot it and do the series a different way. Did we get some feedback, Karen?
We did.
Two
Um,
emails from our
yep, from our
wonderful, yes,
favorite people, I think.
yes,
So Texas on the Shock says, quote, when the long night comes, return to the end of the beginning, unquote.
yeah,
Ancient of ancients shall take you into the dawn. So Sheridan's reached the end of the line and he decides to go out in style. He throws a party to have one last good time with his friends. Emperor Vir Cotto, General Susan Ivanova, head of Earth Stephen Franklin, and CEO of Edgar's Industries Michael Garibaldi. Garibaldi seems to have done well for himself over the years. Though stock has been steady, which ain't sexy, and he and Lise have a daughter. I've seen some speculate that this is actually the daughter Lise had with her ex-husband Franz, but I don't think so. First off, I like to think this is Michael's daughter, and second, Lisa's firstborn would be in her 20s by now. This girl is clearly supposed to be a teenager, which would mean she was born after the series ended. It's a nice little send-off, not just for Sheridan, but for all our main characters. It's heartfelt and hits all the right emotional notes. This is how the show was always going to end, with a single shuttle leaving right before the station explodes. As with so much of JMS's work, it's not about what happens, but about how it happens. So I guess I'll leave that here. This is the Texas on the Shock signing off until Zalveni in Valen's name. Oh, he put it this time. I remarked that he didn't put that at the end of the last episode.
Yes.
And then
All
from
right.
Nathan. Hi, Nathan. Hey, guys. I cry throughout every time when watching the finale. Me too, Nathan. Really hits with the price of the war in an episode-long wake, with a soon-to-be-dead person being present. Also, Ivanova being there adds to the feelings of lost opportunities after the whole season of her missing. First time I didn't know what to expect because previous episodes were already wrapping up things, and it seemed that there was nothing left to do. And we got this, which makes previous episodes an extremely bold choice. I'm yet to experience the show that was winding down, wrapping up, and giving finales for characters for 4 episodes in a row, the way B5 did, instead of just one more final episode.
Contemplative.
John and Delenn are finally in the roles they fit. He commands the military, she commands the civil branch. I think the fact that they were in opposite roles for 2.5 years is a missed opportunity for drama and conflict. Also, Delenn's presence here is different from the rest of season 5. There she played basically a role of Sheridan's sidekick and didn't do much for herself. Here, despite Sheridan being more of a focus, they are once again partners, and it's their relationship and their feelings that are the focus.
All right, Lou, any feedback on our YouTube?
Yeah, we got a couple for the previous episode, Objects at Rest, and starts off with Nathan. It says, funny how we all came up with the same change for Lanier's story.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and FSM Dog says, one left, prepare the tissues. Somehow the crazy idea you cannot love something that has known and recognizable flaws while acknowledging those flaws seems to be more common now. Yeah, I think that's an internet social media thing where something is either a 0 or it's a 10, and there's no middle ground anymore. That seems to have been lost nowadays. Some of the most vicious arguments I've ever seen are between Lord of the Ring fans when any criticism of the movies is made in comparison to the books, or worse, saying that the extended editions or the theatrical versions are better for whatever reasons. And Karen replied to that, saying about tolerance for adaptations is probably at an all-time low these days, and we're seeing it. Every new media thing that's coming out now. Like I saw, like there was this big outcry about the latest quick little clip of the new Superman, how goofy he looked flying, and I'm going, it's like a 3-second clip. How could you tell? Like,
Yeah.
it's just some of the stuff just gets really overblown.
Everyone's a critic.
Everyone's a critic. Everyone's got a pulpit down. But anyhow, on to the final comment here from Derek Flegg says, it's funny how all these years later, the Shadows and the Vorlons remind me of the Republicans and the Democrats. Maybe we should follow Sheridan's lead and boot both the conservatives and the liberals out of the galaxy and get on with our lives.
And I replied,
yeah.
Yeah.
So there you go.
All right. So if someone wants to give us feedback, how can they?
Well, we have our new email account.
JKL Media Reviews.
jklmediareviews@gmail.com. And they can write to us there. Please go to our YouTube channel, JKL Media Reviews, books, movies, other television series, limited run series. One of the standouts for me was 12 Monkeys, where we discussed it a couple episodes at a time. So you might like that as well. So come visit us there. And you can reach me at Aliveria on the social media sites and my blog at alistuff.com.
Lou?
And you can find these episodes about Babylon 5 podcast on my YouTube channel, Lose Reviews. So you'll just have to go to this channel, or you can listen to the audio version that Jesse puts up.
Yeah, it's under JKL Media, anywhere you find podcasts.
Okay.
Aggregators.
And on my YouTube channel, you'll also find Stephen King podcasts as well as my writer interviews. So, and as Karen mentioned, I hope many of you B5 listeners will migrate over to our new JKL Media channel and continue following up with the things that we watch. And we're currently covering Severance.
And Karen?
I already
did.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I am at Jesse Jackson DFW on Twitter, aka X, Jesse Jackson on Facebook. Continue to talk music on Set Lusting Bruce and Perfectly Good Podcast. And very excited that we're talking about Severance, which I hope you guys are following because it's really been fun. And we're going to talk goats in a few minutes.
You're the goat.
All right. We have one episode left. We're going to watch the animated movie that came out in 23, and we'll talk about what could have been, maybe. So we'll see what happens. But for now,
we're not barring the fact that we might pick up something else Babylon 5 related down the road.
Yeah. Thank you, Lou. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, listeners. We'll be back next week to wrap up the Babylon 5 universe. So be safe, be kind. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
And
scene.
Scene.